My name is Erin Gruel, and I am an educator. And I would not be here if it wasn't for the courageous folks in this film. My students took the name Freedom Writers, W-R-I-T-E-R, in honor of those freedom writers, R-I-D-E-R-S, those that we saw in this film. And my students became accidentally on purpose activists and authors, and just like the courageous people we saw in this film, wrote themselves into existence. So I want to start with you as someone who, as a young child, had familiarity with this incredible park and didn't know its illustrious history. So can we go back to when you were a youth, not knowing the background of the film that you would eventually make?
That's sort of hard to remember. But I do remember, I grew up about 20 minutes away from the park, the national park, that is on the grounds of Glen Echo Amusement Park. It's working. And that national park, I mean, it's still to this day, it's beautiful. And it's kind of like this gorgeous example of urban decay. The roller coaster tracks were still on the ground. There was no roller coaster, but there was a shooting gallery that was covered in pigeon excrement and rusty. But it was so evocative. And as a kid, I just loved the place. It was also an arts colony, so I went to day camp there, and everyone in my family did some different art form and took classes there. It was where the DC Folk Festival was every year. And so it was really just like beloved destination. And the National Park Service had photographs around the park of the park's glory days. And it was still recent enough that the mythology of Glen Echo Park was very available to me. And I had neighbors whose grandparents had gotten engaged on the Ferris wheel. And there was a lot of people like that around, and I would say I was nostalgic for a time I didn't even know. And it wasn't until many years later, like about 20 years later, that I learned, upon taking my fiance to the park, thinking about it as a wedding venue, that I heard the story from a park ranger about how the park was integrated. And I didn't have any idea that the park had ever needed to be integrated. I didn't have any idea that the park had been whites only. And I had been looking at those photographs. My whole childhood, I looked at those photographs, and I had just never registered that I was only looking at white people having a great time. And white people throughout, from the turn of the century until 1960. Anyway, that was the genesis of the film.
Wow. I'm an educator. I've taught middle school, high school, and college. And until your film, I did not know about Glen Echo.
I've actually never thought about it that way. That's a really good question. I mean, I would say civil rights and human rights was just like part of dinner table conversation, and it was part of the culture of the household. My father was a Jewish labor organizer, and unfortunately he passed away before I started working on the film, and I wish I could have asked him, like, why didn't we live in Bannockburn? So I think the word activist is really interesting. It's an interesting word because there's so many different ways to respond. And I guess that's what activism is to me. It's like it's responding, and some people respond by marching, and some people respond by writing, and some people respond by making films. And so, I guess the answer is yes.
The ordinary nature of the extraordinary outcome is what brings us all together. That was the mother who said she forgot about her children, and she is still on the front line. I think that gave a lot of us a chuckle because she was a mother, and she wasn't at home taking care of her kids. Her kids were on the front line. But I love that it was students from Howard. It was neighbors. It was church-going folk, people from the synagogue. So I love that you painstakingly found about 150 people to narrow it down to the handful that you interviewed. So can you talk about finding 150 people painstakingly with those photos, the deep dive into the archive, because the cinematography is spectacular. And hearing them speak and then seeing their photograph is just awe-inspiring. So how did you find all of these folks?
That day when I learned the story about the film, about the protest, this park ranger, his name was Sam Swirsky, and Sam had been working at the park for decades. And along the way, people would come and say, I protested here, and he took down their names. And a few years before I met him, he had created a reunion of anyone that he could find who had been there, heavily weighted towards Bannockburn because that's who was still around. Heavily weighted towards the white people that were still around. But so I had a starting place. I had those people. And then I started with the published record. There was probably about 12 regular mainstream newspapers that were in circulation in D.C. at the time. I mean, most of them were defunct, but, I found them in church basements and microfiche and just anything that was actually published at that time. And it wasn't like I could just type in Glen Echo protest and anything would come up on Google. I mean, I literally had to read everything cover to cover, of course, for the course of that entire year, looking for mentions of Glen Echo. But somebody would be quoted here, and then I would find that person, and that person was quoted would tell me about their friend who had also been there. So it was a lot of chasing down rumors. I think the women were really the hardest to find because women did not keep their names. So somebody who was Karen Smith was no longer Karen Smith. And, eventually I found the MAG letterhead, and that gave me, it was just talking to alumni associations, and somebody would say, oh, I think that he became a dermatologist and moved to Santa Ana, actually. That's Marvis Saunders, and he was actually with me at the Q&A yesterday. But it was just a lot of just, following leads, years of following leads.
So for those of you that don't know, you started this in 2014.
Well, 2014 was my first world camera.
Okay,
I've been thinking about the film really since 2008.
2008. And I think, if I may be so bold and brazen, I think it's more relevant today in 2026 than probably when you first had your first screening. She's won so many awards and traveled the world with film festivals. But I think now, in February, African American History Month, it is more I sat there weeping. I was a puddle. And I want every one of my students, every teacher I've ever taught to see it because it is so relevant now. So when you see it now, do you feel it's even more powerful and provocative because the climate of our country?
Well, honestly, I don't see it now because I can't watch it. No, I mean, I've just seen it so many thousands and thousands of times now. I see it and I think, oh, why did I mix that level so high right there? Yeah, of course, it is way more relevant now than it even was when I released the film a year and a half ago. It's really, it's disturbing to me how many communities and schools are reaching out for the film because they're looking for a playbook. And when I started making the film, Obama was president. And I thought I was making a film that was a straight line from this interracial protest to a post-racial White House. And we, of course, know what happened next. And I mean, it was almost like a nostalgia film, and now it's really more of a playbook film. And, I'm glad I'm grateful to have something that's like a tool that I can offer to people who are already doing this work. Yeah.
I think one of the most beautiful pictures was seeing one of your main characters standing with Obama when you were eulogizing where they've all ended up as educators and activists, and it makes me think about that 11:30 p.m. Truth Social that was unceremoniously put out in the world depicting Obama, and then seeing him on the stage personally makes me miss him. But it, once again, it makes me think the people that are doing these things need to see this film. So have you had an opportunity to show it to members of Congress? Have you had an opportunity to show it to the people who need to see it the most?
I mean, I've been trying actually to get it on Capitol Hill, and I have not been successful yet. Probably not. I mean, probably the honest answer is that the people who come to see the film, and there have been many, but probably the honest answer is it's the people who are already in the choir.
You were all part of the choir, but you were heavily connected in this choir. So we are probably 1 degree away from 1 degree. And maybe there's somebody in this very audience who could be a conduit for those that have power and authority to see it.
I just want to just add to that about just like how bad it is. At least I live in Philadelphia, and we just our exhibition in front of the Liberty Bell about George Washington's enslaved people was just taken down because it's part of the National Park Service. So I got a call about last week, I think, from someone in the National Park Service office that services Glen Echo, who hadn't seen the film. That office has not seen the film, and she was like basically like whispering to me in a closet, like I really want to get this. I'm trying to figure out how I can do it, despite the executive order. I'm trying to figure it out. I mean, it's unbelievable to me that like it's to that extent.
For you, you said that for those that know an educator or maybe an educator, you have a teacher's guide for this. So can you talk about that? Because I think if you have a son or a daughter or a grandchild in a school, is this available to show in schools? And then your sons and daughters and grandkids can come and have courageous conversations with you after they see it. So how do they get their hands on the teacher's guide?
Thank you. Well, so we created a classroom version of the film that's shorter and sort of like some of the things that are less interesting to kids are not in the film, and a teacher's guide. I didn't write it. It's written by this beautiful interracial team of civil rights educators, and it's actually just available, downloadable on our website for free if you go to the education tab. And then and we also license the film for schools.
This is part of the film festival, so I want to ask you some nerdy technical questions. I thought it was glorious how you had the artwork and the music, taking those old photographs and bringing them to life. So can you talk about how in that fluidity you were able to find the photograph, the person to interview, and then use art to bring it to life in slow motion?
Thank you. It was really important to me that I wasn't making like a PBS Ken Burns film. Not that I have great respect for Ken Burns films, but there wasn't going to be talking heads. There wasn't going to be a narrator. Like everybody who was in the film was there, and every single image that you saw in the film was authentic. So like even that affected decisions like fonts and color palettes and chord arrangements. But of course, like I didn't have footage of everything, and so I had a problem. So that was about finding a solution to the problem, and the problem was I didn't want to take people out of the film. I mean, basically, when you make a documentary and you don't have footage of something, you have a few options. So one option is recreations, which we're all familiar with, and I didn't want to do that because I didn't want to fool anybody and like sort of pretend like this is what it looked like. Sometimes people use animation, and I didn't want to do that either because I feel like that really takes you out of the moment. And I was really trying to transport people to 1960 in as unfiltered a way as possible. So that was the controlling intelligence, and so what you see is footage that is contemporaneous, like when Dion is running out of the library. Obviously that's not Dion, but that is another boy about that same time period, about that same kind of milieu, and then we sort of treated it with this watercolor effect to kind of signal to the audience, this isn't it, of course, this isn't it, but this is what it felt like.
That day when I learned the story about the film, about the protest, this park ranger, his name was Sam Swirsky, and Sam had been working at the park for decades, and along the way, people would come and say, you know, I protested here, and he took down their names. And a few years before I met him, he had created a reunion of anyone that he could find who had been there, heavily weighted towards Bannockburn, because that's who was still around, heavily weighted towards the white people that were still around. But so I had a starting place. I had those people. And then I started with the published record. There was probably about 12 regular mainstream newspapers that were in circulation in DC at the time. I mean, most of them were defunct, but you know, I found them in church basements and microfiche and just anything that was actually published at that time. And it wasn't like I could just like type in Glen Echo protest and anything would come up on Google. I mean, I literally had to like read everything cover to cover, of course, over the course of that entire year, looking for mentions of Glen Echo. But you know, somebody would be quoted here, and then I would find that person, and that person was quoted would tell me about their friend who had also been there. So it was a lot of like kind of like chasing down rumors. I think the women were really the hardest to find because women did not keep their names. So somebody who was Karen Smith was no longer Karen Smith. And, you know, eventually I found a mag letterhead, and that gave me, you know, it was just talking to alumni associations, and somebody would say, oh, I think that he became a dermatologist and moved to Santa Ana, actually. That's Marvis Saunders, and he was actually with me at the Q&A yesterday. But it was just a lot of just, you know, following leads, years of following leads.
And I still believe in inclusion and equity and diversity. That's, you know, those are my mantras. So I love that that was your driving force in bringing together a film team from different walks of life. And so can you explain from the music that was so thoughtful, from the artistic, even your editors? I know that you really went out and wanted this film to be as diversely created behind the camera as it was in front of the camera.
Yeah, I mean, it's not so much that I wanted to be inclusive for its own sake. I had to be inclusive because that was what was going to make this film. Like, I'm a Jewish girl, and my experience, my lived experience, my family's memories are limited to being a Jew in America in this particular period in time. So, like, I couldn't possibly imagine what it was to be African American in that period of time. I mean, that's just like, I mean, it's not just hubris, it's stupid. And so, like, really my number one collaborator, my most important collaborator is Sandra Christie, who's the editor, and she's just a genius. I mean, has credits on any civil rights documentary, starting with like Eyes on the Prize. So I was really lucky to work with her. And just like the tension of what we were each bringing to it, our own, you know, ideas and perspectives, our own lived experiences. Like, if the film's any good, it's really because I was working with Sandra and also a lot of advisors, history advisors, filmmaking advisors. But you know, it wasn't like inclusion, like just for the sake of inclusion, because it's a beautiful idea, but like that isn't enough. It was also because like there's just no way to make this film without people who reflected the experience of people on the picket line, and also a lot of focus groups. You know, we tested this film with different generations, different races, different socioeconomic levels, because it wasn't just that I wanted to make sure that I got the film right, the story right for the people who lived it. I also wanted to make sure that it landed right for people who are young today, who are bringing their own experiences to it.
The bakers. That's a question I had. Did you ever find anything? I know they were very vague in why they reversed their feelings on segregation. I don't know if it had anything to do with Robert Kennedy or the picket lines that summer before, but did you ever find out after you started doing screenings, did anyone show up and say, I knew them? And did you get any more juicy gossip about them?
Thank you. I'm waiting for one of the bigger, like, I don't know, great-grandchildren to show up at a screening. No, I mean, really, like, everything that they ever said is in the movie. You know, anything that they published is in the no comment, that we just feel like we have nothing to say. That's all in the film. You know, I do know I think it was 1979, so like 10 years after the park closed, they bought another amusement park in northern New Jersey, and that park had never been segregated, and obviously, you know, they kept it integrated. Yeah, I can't speak for them. And as for what finally pushed them over the edge, I really believe that is probably what happened. I believe that probably Robert Kennedy or somebody in his office called them and threatened to revoke the lease of the parking lot, because you can't have an amusement park in the suburbs without a parking lot. Like, that doesn't work. But because I felt like I was creating a primary text, since there isn't any other research, there isn't any other sources about this, I didn't feel like I could editorialize or put anything in the film that I couldn't prove, backwards, upwards, upside down. And trust me, there are a lot of really good stories that I heard along the way that are not in the film because I couldn't prove them. So I don't feel like I could say for sure that's what happened. But I do think there's a man who is part of Bannockburn. His name is Hyman Bookbinder. He later became the DC representative to the American Jewish Committee. He was at that point the Assistant Undersecretary of Commerce. He came in with the Kennedy administration. I think it's really likely that I have pictures of him with Bobby Kennedy. I think it's really likely he had the conversation. But I did go to like the Kennedy Library and look for, you know, some secretary's chicken scratch that said, you know, call on, you know, February 2nd with Abram Baker, and I never found that. But I did, in terms of like learning things, like recently, maybe a few months ago, I was at a screening and there was a woman in the audience who had gone to the Catholic school in the area that's now closed. And, you know, she was in her probably late 70s, and she said, you know, she went to the Bobby Kennedy children birthday parties that were at Glen Echo. So, you know, obviously it was part of Bobby Kennedy's experience, but I don't know 100%. I can't say 100% sure that he made the call.
I feel like this was your dissertation. I feel like I need to call you doctor. What I do love is you got some really heavy hitters to read the letters that were in the editorial pages, and Mandy Patinkin, Jeffrey Wright. So talk about that. How did you get these juggernauts in the entertainment industry to help you with this project?
I paid them.
They didn't just volunteer. Oh. But you chose the right folks to have it. I think that it was, and so for the letters, that was really intriguing. The letters to the editors. How did you decide which ones to include?
I mean, all the letters to the editor that are in the film are like, they represent 25 or 30 other letters to the editor that were just like that, you know. And so, you know, I chose the ones that were gonna read well, that were gonna sound, you know, that were gonna be good film, but that also were not aberrative. That represented the consciousness at the time.
I think for a lot of us who are just shocked at those that have not learned from history, we are doomed to repeat it. And when we see Elon Musk do a gesture that looks like a Heil Hitler, or a Nick Fuentes, who openly supports the Nazi Party at times, do you find that by including the National Nazi Party in the film harkens to what's happening now? Because I didn't even know about the story, but I also didn't know about that fascist group that was protesting. So I think I was learning a lot tonight, and I'm relatively educated. So when you're making it then and seeing what's happening now, especially with the rise of anti-Semitism and some of the stuff being normalized that should not be normalized. Do you find the urgency of the now of more people seeing this film?
Well, yes, of course. But, I will say that when I look at those Nazi signs, I'm always struck by the fact that they are vilifying Jews and African Americans on the same sign. It's on the same sign. And so I always think about that, we're kidding ourselves if we think, they're only coming for some of us. Like, if they're coming for some of us, they are coming for all of us. And, it just might be that at this moment in time, the most vulnerable people are undocumented, for example. But that's just this moment. It's only 5 minutes from now that they're going to be coming for African Americans, they'll be coming from Jews. I mean, that's my opinion. And so I just think white supremacists don't necessarily distinguish levels of who they think are inferior.
I'd like to take a moment, because we have such an incredible group of folks who came on a school night, no less. Is there anyone that is bold or audacious enough to stand and ask her a question? I really want this to be a celebration of what we've just seen. And is anybody feeling bold enough to stand up?
I have to say I have a really hard time with sort of a broad strokes definition of what the Black community has done or has not done, the same way that I have a really hard time with anybody lumping me in with the Jews, because I'm sure that you feel the same way. There are plenty of Jews who I personally would rather scratch my own eyeballs out and eat them than claim them as mine. So just the same. Okay. So as much as there are individuals who have been disappointing, I don't think that we can say the Black community has done any one thing or another, because there's no such thing as like an entire people that
I see it with obviously the disqualification.
Yeah.
No group is homogeneous.
That's right. So in terms of your question about outreach to the African American community, I mean, I've had the great privilege of having the film be on the Black Film Festival circuit and the Jewish Film Festival circuit and the Mainstream Film Festival circuit at the same time, actually, and sometimes even in the same city, like days apart. And there's been definite huge amount of enthusiasm from like Black Chambers of Commerce and HBCUs and NAACP chapters. That said, the organized African American film going community is just doesn't have like the same infrastructure that the Jewish community does. It's just for various reasons. It's not like Jewish film festivals are so well resourced in comparison. So I would say in terms of numbers of people who have seen the film, probably more white people, more Jewish people have seen the film in terms of numbers. But it's not for lack of interest, I don't think. I think it's just about like how people see films and how they hear about films in this country. 1960 doesn't look the same as protest in 2026. And I think that, issues are different and nuances are different. And I mean, I don't feel like I'm in any kind of expert about the anti-Zionism protests at all. I mean, I don't feel like that's not what I made a film about. I can't talk about that with any real expertise. But I mean, I think that if we care about something, then we are morally obligated to stand up when we see it being opposed.
I think if I could piggyback off that, I feel there was a wall of photographs that you so beautifully showed of the freedom riders, and there was the homage riders, yes, and those that were incarcerated, and they were both Caucasian and African American, and especially Elaine, who was in Mississippi and looking out and thinking of the guard tower and thinking of what had happened to family during the Holocaust. And I feel a little spark of hope with Minnesota and the mayor who had such righteous indignation. And I feel that in the sense that, sadly, because 2 Caucasians were shot, Alex and Renee, it mobilized more people, sadly. The loss of those 2 people, a poet and a nurse. So I think you're right about protesting. When we protest, good can be done. And so I want to leave you with the last word, because I hope we all leave here and tell our friends and family and sons and daughters and colleagues about this film. I really encourage you to get teachers, get their hands on this, because if I've been teaching for 3 decades and I didn't know the story, I want to implement this into my curriculum ASAP. So help me disseminate that to our teachers here in Southern California. But how would you like us to leave tonight? With what words of wisdom and call to action, and make us all accidentally on purpose activists?
That's a great question. When I learned about the civil rights movement, I probably graduated high school and could name 5 civil rights activists, maybe John Lewis, Diane Nash, Martin Luther King, a couple other people. Because I'm Jewish, Abraham Joshua Heschel. And I never learned about, I never thought about the thousands and thousands and thousands of people who never went to the bridge at Selma, who just stood up and acted locally at their local swimming pool, amusement park, library, lunch counter, movie theater. And if you don't learn about the people who are, ordinary, then you don't have accessible heroes. And if you don't have accessible heroes, then you don't think that you have any capacity, or you don't think that you have any agency in being able to make change, protest. And so I guess I hope that people find people in the film to identify with, and I hope we all just are intimately and fiercely aware that we all do have capacity to act on history's stage, and we don't have to be sheep. We don't have to put up with this, even if we're not famous or rich or powerful or Elon Musk.
Well, she taught us that we can stand up and speak out, so I hope that we can give her a standing ovation to this exquisite film. We are all going to stand up. We are all going to speak out. And I think so justly deserved.